Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. On behalf of the Ismaili Women's Activities Portfolio, in partnership with Women Empowered, welcome to our International Women's Day event, Real Life, Real Stories, Be Bold for Change. Over the next hour, you will hear powerful stories of 5 motivating speakers who've instigated change in their lives and to those around them through sheer determination, tenacity, and on their way helped others. In TED-style talks, they will share their journeys through adversity to reach success. Before we begin, there's a bit of housekeeping to share. So you'll have all seen we've got great gifts on our seats, some nice little sweets. First of all, can I ask that if you want to have them, take them now so that we don't have the wrappers going during the talk. The toilets are on the ground floor to the left of the main stairs down here. And there are no planned fire alarms tonight, so if you hear a loud pitch, please follow the volunteers who will guide you out of the building. There are 3 fire exits, one there, and one down there. I feel like an air steward. Last but not least, can you all please switch off your mobile phones so that we can show a bit of respect to our speakers this evening? You have on your seats a program of events which contains a short introduction to each of our amazing speakers. To kick off this evening's events, please welcome Naseem Jivraj, Head of Citizenship at Barclays Corporate Banking Global and National Council Member for the Ismaili Women's Activities Portfolio. Thank you, Naseem.
Wow, so many of you here today. I'm so proud. So, Bismillahir-Rahmanir-Rahim. Ladies and gentlemen, leaders, my dear brothers and sisters, it is my absolute privilege to welcome you all to the Ismaili Centre this evening to celebrate International Women's Day, a truly global endeavour commemorating the social, economic, cultural and political achievements of women from all walks of life. Be Bold for Change is brought to you by the Women's Activities Portfolio, a member of the Ismaili Council for the UK. Our mission is to enable access, support and empowerment initiatives and activities for the benefit of all female members of the Ismaili community and their families. Our support covers all touch points in women's lives across all age groups. We achieve this by collaborating with other Ismaili institutions, leaders and established groups within the community and beyond, and ensuring that issues particular to women are addressed at all levels. We are therefore delighted that today we have the full support and partnership of Women Empowered, a social initiative founded by Rena, which aims to empower women to make the best of their individual skills and talents and help them to achieve whatever personal and professional goals they have. But what makes this association even more significant is our shared values, that of respect, tolerance and service to others, the unison of a common vision. And so I hope today is the start of a relationship that goes from strength to strength, and together we can create scale and continue to make a difference to the lives of women and their families. I just wanted to say a few words about this building where we are hosting tonight's event. The Ismaili Centre is a reflective of the identity of the Ismaili Muslim community. It is a place for prayer, but also a place for dialogue and learning. As well as lectures, this building regularly hosts exhibitions, recitals, musical concerts, cultural shows, and other such programs that bring peoples of all communities together so that we may know each other better, hence why this is the perfect setting for International Women's Day. At the opening of this building in 1983, His Highness the Aga Khan said that this building, quote, represents the inspiring traditions of the past, the stirring challenges of the future, and the continuing search for peace through prayer, unquote. We hope that those amongst the audience for whom this is their first visit will take the opportunity to take a tour of the building after the event. So here we are, it's International Women's Day 2017, and gender equality for women across the world has yet to be realised. A gender pay gap, which is about 13.9% in the UK, persists across the globe, and women are still not represented in equal numbers in business and politics. Figures show that globally, women's education, health, and violence towards women is still worse than that of men. And according to the World Economic Forum, the gender gap won't close until 2186. This is too long to wait. Therefore, whilst today is about acknowledging and celebrating the amazing contributions women make to our world and our future, it also provides an opportunity for reflection, for advocacy, and most importantly, action. No one government, NGO, charity, corporation, academic institution, or women's network is solely responsible for these issues. It requires collective responsibility. All of us, both men and women, to be bold, to be brave, move this agenda forward, and to motivate change for our communities and for our children and their children from generation to generation. This evening, you have the opportunity to hear from an array of thought-provoking speakers, each one of them being bold and affecting change. A chance for all of us to listen, share, learn, and be inspired. But each one of us can be a leader within our own spheres of influence by taking bold, pragmatic action to accelerate gender parity. I also think that whilst today's focus is on gender, it is important to recognise the current political landscape and the polarisation we are seeing across society. The disparity where all facets of diversity are being questioned, be it cultural, faith, ethnicity, and so on. And so for all of us in particular, the challenge has become harder. The world is moving in a direction that is not embracing the strength of diversity. The intellectual capacity of any organisation or community is built on its people, the diversity of its people. So none of us can sit back, watch, and simply do nothing. As Malala once said, do not wait for someone else to come and speak for you. It is you who can change the world. Through purposeful collaboration, like what we are doing today, by engaging in dialogue, not debate, by assuming positive intent, by being transparent, open and willing to admit mistakes, by embracing the power of positive listening, by creating trusting and safe places where a little bit of discomfort is okay, by committing to have conversations that matter, by challenging the unconscious bias that we all carry, by speaking up to bridge divides. We are all, each one of us, responsible for moving this agenda forward, no matter our age or who we are, so that our children do not have the challenges we continue to face both personally and professionally. I'd just like to close by leaving you with a quote from His Highness the Aga Khan, made during a TV interview in India in 1989, and he says, "Everyone's life is a passage, and perhaps the most one can do is to have left something behind during that passage which contributes and assists people to look to their future with more confidence, more stability, and more hope." Ladies and gentlemen, what we share is more powerful than what divides us, so let's all be bold for change. It's now my privilege and pleasure to introduce our keynote speaker for the evening, Yalda Hakim. You all have the bios in front of you to refer to, so without further ado, please welcome Yalda. Thank you very much.
In June of 2014, I sat in my living room in London and watched the television as a brutal, dark militia took over large swathes of northern Iraq. It was only 12 months earlier that I had been smuggled into Mosul, which was then Iraq's second largest city, armed with a mobile phone to document the lives of the Arab world's oldest paragliding club. Like life wasn't difficult enough for them, they're also jumping off the sides of cliffs. And so I watched, and I wanted to know more about what had happened to my paragliders and their beloved Mosul. The paragliding club was made up of a Christian woman, Dr. Nawal, a Shia woman who was a divorcee, Ghada, the captain of the flying club, Dr. Seba, and his son Yasin. Just gives you a sense of the mixing pot that was Mosul. And I'd followed and traced their story, and every Friday afternoon, like people anywhere in the world, they'd go on the outskirts of Mosul to Erbil, and they would jump off the sides of these mountains and then have a big Iraqi feast, food from different communities and cultures from within Iraq. And I broke bread with them, I shared their stories. And as I spent time with them, even inside of Mosul, I realized the challenges that they had faced and were facing. We'd heard of these sleeper cells. We weren't sure if they were Al-Qaeda or another militant group operating from within the city, that they were extorting money from people, but they hadn't emerged, and there were suicide bombings all across the city. Just from getting from the outskirts of Mosul into the governor's compound, my local producer and I counted at least 50 checkpoints that day. And I recorded all of this on my mobile phone. So 12 months later, to be sitting in my living room and to watch their city fall apart, I was desperate to go back, to go and find out what had happened to them. So off I went. I first landed in Erbil, and then we drove 4 hours into Dohuk, where we were hearing about tens of thousands of people who'd been pushed out of their homes from the Yazidi minority community. They'd lived in Iraq for centuries. This was their home. They'd lived alongside their Sunni and Shia and Christian brothers. They were suddenly being pushed out of their homes from in and around Sinjar to other parts of the country. And I reported for 18-hour days at a live point from this refugee camp for the internally displaced people of Iraq. And these people were unsure if they'd ever go back to their homes. And as I stood there and reported, a young boy came up to us and said, "You're from the BBC?" And we said, "Yes." And he said, "There's been a massacre just on the outskirts of Sinjar, and 80 people were killed, but there's one survivor." And so we weren't quite sure. Information that was coming in was quite, sometimes it wasn't accurate, sometimes it was. So my local producer went out to find out some more information, and we found out that there was a 36-year-old man who was in the local hospital in Dohuk. So we went and tracked him down. And there on a bed, I found 36-year-old Mohammed with 5 bullet wounds. And I asked Mohammed what had happened to him. And he said, well, ISIS and the jihadis, Daesh as they call them, had come into our community, and for a week they said to us, either convert or die. And now they were from the Yazidi minority group. They'd lived there for centuries. Their forefathers had come from there. They had no problems prior to this. Suddenly they were being asked to denounce their faith. So he said, we gave them all our possessions, and we said to them, don't kill us, just take everything we have, and we will convert, just let us go, let us be free. And he said, they promised us that they wouldn't kill us. And he said, every night for a week, we'd gather in different homes, and we'd talk about our fate, and we didn't know what was happening. Then he said, at the end of the week, 10 pickup trucks turned up to the community, separated all the men from the women, and all the men were put in these white pickup trucks and taken out into a field. And Mohammed says he was in the 4th or 5th row, and these young men, they began to shoot. And they shot and they shot till everyone was killed. And he said, I could hear them laughing and talking and walking up and seeing if anyone was moving. And anyone who did move, they would shoot them at point blank range. And he said, I had 5 bullet wounds, but I played dead. And for 3 or 4 hours, he played dead. And he says he can't remember how long it was because the time felt like it was moving so slowly. And he said after a while, they brought what was a tractor and picked up all the bodies and dumped us into an irrigation creek. So remember, he's still alive and he can see and feel everything that's happening to him. So he's dumped in this irrigation creek with all the other bodies, and he lies there and he remains there until it goes silent. And once it had gone silent, he got up, and with 5 bullet wounds, he ran. And he ran to the closest community. And that's when we were informed in the internally displaced camp that we're in, that these people had been killed and there was one survivor. And I asked Mohammed what had happened to his 3-year-old daughter and his wife and his mother and father, and he didn't know if they were alive or dead. And I suppose I remember that every time I look again at the television screen and I see tens of thousands of migrants and refugees fleeing their homes and arriving to European shores, looking for a chance at a better life. And I did find out what happened to my paragliders. Dr. Nawal was in a refugee camp in Jordan, and I went and tracked her down. And when I went to see her, this incredibly proud woman who was a teacher and taught at the local high school, who had been flying since her 20s, enjoyed all the freedoms of life in Iraq, was now in a refugee camp. And she wept when she saw me, and she talked about not knowing what would happen to the future of her and her daughters. Captain Seba and his son Yasin, who'd vowed never to leave Mosul, were in Turkey, in a camp as well. And Ghada, she was executed in the streets of Mosul for speaking up against ISIS. And I think about the proud woman that Ghada was. She was 42, she'd just become divorced, and she used flying as a way to feel free again, she told me. And I think that perhaps she would have felt very proud that that's the way that she went. And I think back about my own personal journey and the fact that if my family hadn't migrated to Australia from Afghanistan, which is the country of my birth, and in the early 1980s, my father had just returned from what was Czechoslovakia, and he was studying architecture, and he returned to a society on the brink of war. He was going to be conscripted into the army, and he served once, and he didn't want to go to war, so he decided in the dead of night to flee the country with his young family. I was 6 months old at the time. My older sister was 7, and my brother was 9. And off they went with a people smuggler over the mountains into Pakistan, and they spent 2 years there before migrating to Australia. I think about these refugees and often how they're demonized. And I think if I wasn't given the opportunities that I was, perhaps I wouldn't be on this platform today. Perhaps I wouldn't be talking about inspiration and change and being able to go to these places and give these very voiceless people a voice and a platform to be able to have their stories reach millions of people. About 12 months ago, I traveled back to the country of my birth, Afghanistan, to do a story about a small television network called Tolo Tv. And Tolo has brought about incredible change. They were born out of the fall of the Taliban and the rise of the new government in Afghanistan post 9/11. And this small network did a report last year, and they did a report that was not favorable to the Taliban. Now, if you do a piece of reporting anywhere else in the world and it's not liked by a government or another group, they may put in a complaint and we may assess the complaint. And, it might go a bit further, we might put out an apology. But in a place like Afghanistan, if they're not happy with the way that you report, it means death. And so a small bus carrying these Tolo staff members was leaving the station, and the Taliban rammed a car full of explosives into their bus, and 7 people were killed, 20 people were injured. And while I was there, I met Shakila Ibrahim Khel, who was a 35-year-old woman. She was a widow. She had 3 children. And during the reign of the Taliban, she'd been married off at the age of 14 by her family. And they wanted not to deal with the burden of having this young woman living in their home. Her husband had often treated her very badly and had beaten her up. Eventually, he died. She was left with these 3 children, and then the Taliban fell, and she was given a chance at a new life. She'd become a journalist for Tolo TV, and her job, we might have a traffic reporter here in London, her job was to be the suicide bombing correspondent. And so every time there was a suicide bombing, off she'd go out into the streets to do profiles on the people who'd been killed. So that night, after her colleagues had been killed, she had to go to their homes, inform their families, and then do profiles on these people that she'd worked with, who she sat next to, who were her colleagues and they considered family. And in my conversation with Shakila, I discovered that she was born in the same hospital as I was, and she was only a couple of years older than me. And again, it brings me back to the challenges that these people face. Shakila no longer lives in Afghanistan. She fled the country. She felt it was no longer safe for her, and she migrated to Turkey and then went off to Austria, where she's now living as a refugee. And I looked at Shakila and I wondered whether, had my family not fled the country, would I have been married off? Would I be a journalist at Tolo TV? Would I be working for a television network? Would I still have the same aspirations and dreams? And I suppose what I realized when I travel to these places is that whether you're in Baghdad or New York or London or Kabul, the aspirations, especially of young women and girls, is the same. It's universal. They want to fall in love. They want to have a career. They want to have choices and basic freedoms. And I suppose if I was thinking about being bold and bringing about change, I would think about all of you here. You can potentially do these things in your communities. There are so many people arriving on these shores now who are refugees, who are human beings, and they're looking for a chance at a better life. Thank you.
Thank you, Yalda. What an inspiring talk. It's clear to me from listening to your piece that you have a real passion to actually, as you say, give people a voice and to use your influence to share people's experiences and help realize what's actually happening in other parts of the world. So I commend you for that. Can we all please give Yalda another round of applause? Unfortunately, our next speaker, Jayne Galvin, Managing Director within the financial services industry, is not able to be with us here tonight. For those of you who attended our event last year, you'll remember the lasting impact she made. She spoke openly and honestly about being a single parent and about rising through the ranks in banking, despite being told that this was no place for a woman. Jayne has kindly sent us a message in her absence. For the wonderful women in the room tonight, I've been looking forward to speaking to you all this evening after the really warm welcome last year. It's with real sadness for me that I'm not with you now. I'm instead with my mum, who's been given just a few days to live. I know you will all understand why I have chosen to be where I am, and this for me is my lesson to share with you all tonight. It's okay to make a choice that you believe is the right one, even if it goes against one of your principles. One of mine is always to stand by my commitments, to be honest with yourself and others, and when you need to, it's okay to put family first. Everyone understands that simple rule, and I'm sure you all understand my rationale. So if ever faced with a similar dilemma, I hope you will remember this story. I'm hoping that now Naz will tell a funny story to get you all laughing and to keep you in the mood, a light mood. It's what both me and my mum would want. Have a fantastic evening and make notes from all the speakers. I'm sure the evening will be full of great tips. Capture them all. You will want to draw on them at different stages in your life. With love, Jayne. I'm sure you'll all join me in passing on our best wishes to Jayne at this very difficult time. So without further delay, let me introduce you to our next speaker. Sach Kukadia, founder of secretsales.com. Can we please give him a very warm welcome?
Good evening. It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you for the introduction. I was asked and invited here by Rena, who I know very well, and she knows my family extremely well, and actually was interested in and asked me to talk a little bit about my family and my mother's influence and all of the key women who have helped me grow throughout my career as part of Secret Sales. And I mean, when I think about why I started Secret Sales, actually a lot of it was ingrained from a very young age, in that my family is full of entrepreneurs. My father, and my mother were both from Kenya. They came over. My dad at 16 by himself, worked in biscuit factories and ice cream factories, and eventually found himself a significant shareholder of Pepe Jeans, and following that ran multiple companies. One thing about my father, however, was that he was never really someone to think about the future. He never really invested. My mother, on the other hand, was absolutely that person. And if that phrase, behind every successful man is a more successful woman, there's no truer words than in my family, I can tell you. My mother is really the glue within the family. She has invested a lot of the money into property. She runs a children's home for autistic children. And she is really the one that has distilled a lot of the ideologies within the family that have taught me, my brother, and my siblings what we know today. My sister's an orthodontist. She runs her own practice. My younger brother's recently launched his own business, and he's 26 years old. And my older brother, Nish, who is my co-founder at Secret Sales, he's been with me for 10 years, and he's really been my foundation, and he's really taught me a lot. Now, I mean, I look at a lot of my friends who I grew up with, my English friends and my Caucasian friends, and actually none of them have started a business themselves. They're all working for big corporates, which, by the way, there's nothing wrong with that at all. But when I think back as to why everyone in my family is running a business of their own or of some sort, it's down to certain ideologies that my mother distilled literally from the days I can remember. The first thing she always said was that we should always, always, always try to work for ourselves. You can never really make true money if you're working for someone else. The second thing, of course, is that you should always try and work with family if you can. Not always that easy, but that was something that she was very, very firm about. And the third thing, which she was always trying to seed, was, try to think about the next big thing, which is not always that easy to do, but try and think about what everyone needs but no one has. And, when you think about these ideologies and why they exist, for me, it's purely down to culture, right? As Asians, I think we have a very strong family unity and direction that a lot of my friends didn't have. As a child, I was a little bit troublesome. I was kicked out of school at 9 years old for selling newspapers. I mean, it's not illegal to sell newspapers, but the private school I was in was very unhappy that I was doing that. My father was ecstatic. He was like, "Oh, entrepreneur, very good," And my mother was furious. I can tell you that she was absolutely furious. Later throughout my teenage years, had a few other issues at school, and I started a pirate radio station. For me, I was more interested in making money than I was, education. And that was just, it was natural. It wasn't even that I needed the money. My parents gave me everything I needed, but it was more just a matter of wanting to do it and try and generate a level of income. Now, what was really important throughout my teenage years, which was quite, a dark era in my life, was that my mother was the only one in my family that really understood what I was going through, even though she had no idea what I was going through. She was the only one that really stood by me. She gave me lots of advice. Of course, if I didn't listen to that advice, she would approach it in a slightly different way. But in any case, I took her learnings and, post-university, I was 6 months out of uni, I started a company called secretsales.com. And I was 23 years old, and actually it derived from a love of sales shopping. So my sister, my mother, are totally crazy for clothes and for anything that's discounted. What was really funny for me is that I used to go to Selfridges with them on Boxing Day, and we used to run around and bag whatever we could. And I used to think, what is it about this experience? Because actually it's not that good. But essentially, the emotion of bagging something at a reduced price is something that, really hits home with a lot of people. And what I didn't want to do is have to wait till Boxing Day every year. So we tried to bring that experience of Selfridges Boxing Day every single day. And that's what Secret Sales is. All the same brands, 70% off. So, for those of you that haven't signed up, there's the punchline. So I was 23 when I launched the company. I was young. I hadn't worked for anyone in my family. I haven't worked for anyone outside of my family. But what was really good when I started the business was that I did it with my brother. And we have very distinct and very different personalities in that his strengths are my weaknesses and vice versa. I was very good at buying and the creative side, and my brother was very good at the tech and marketing. And actually, we didn't cross over so much, and we didn't need to cross over. I trusted him, and he trusted me. My mother lent me £10,000. I actually put her house on the line, and I borrowed more money from a bank, which, in hindsight, was probably the stupidest thing I've done. But, it was the only way of actually, generating enough money to try and do this. But it did force us to be super, super bootstrapped. We had to. Failure wasn't an option at this point. And, being so young, I was living at home as she was giving me pocket money, she was feeding me. So it was much easier to start a business back then and have her support. In 2009, so this is 2 years in of having run the business, we had disrupted the market. We were being courted by a number of venture capital institutions, and they were interested in putting money into the business. And we knew that we wanted to be big. We also knew that we wanted to be powerful, and to do that we needed more money, and there's only so much you can ask from your parents before everyone has to declare bankruptcy. So we sort of felt as though, let's take this money, let's go and explore what speaking to a VC is about. And actually for me that was a learning curve within itself, but we did eventually secure 3 term sheets, which was a great success, and we were very, very happy about that. But 1 week before we were due to sign, we were approached by a German investor called Brands for Friends. And they are a very similar flash sales model. So they do exactly the same thing that we do here in the UK, but in Berlin. And because of the competitive landscape, they did 25 million euros in their first year. They did 80 million euros in their second year. And suddenly, in their very arrogant status, they felt that they wanted to go international. And they looked at us, amongst other companies here, and they felt that we were best suited for their portfolio. And from my point of view, at the time we were raising £4 million from the VCs. Brands for Friends offered us £4 million with better terms, with a blueprint to scale. It made a lot more sense. The only caveat, however, in this situation was that they said, you'll only get the second $2 million if you grow the company 5-fold in the first 6 months. So I sort of looked at my brother and I said, well, that's a little bit crazy. That's not going to happen. But we did. We drove everything forward. We hired from 20 to 70 people. We moved our warehouse from internal to an external. We moved our offices from Parkwall to Notting Hill. And essentially, we took this £4 million. What we didn't realize is that around the corner, eBay was knocking on the door, and they were very eager to buy Brands for Friends and Secret Sales. And Brands for Friends ended up selling after 3 months for $200 million after 2 years worth of trading. Secret Sales, their shares were sold, or the shares that they held in our business were sold to eBay. And at the same time, as founders, we decided that we wanted to reduce them down. We wanted to reduce eBay's participation because they were too big a machine and we knew they weren't going to support us. So we essentially then went out, we went from being a very break-even business to a company that was in hyper-growth, that was burning £250,000 every single month. And we also knew that with the cash in bank, we probably had about 4 or 5 months worth of run rate. So we went from being stable to super high growth to then having to very quickly become stable again. So we ended up culling staff, we ended up having to renegotiate all of our contracts, we negotiated our contribution margins and did everything we could to get us to a position where we were focused on performance. Later that year, we secured some more investment from a new group of VCs, which was great. £6.5 million came in. And since then, what we've done is we've really focused the business on efficiency. Everything is UK-based. We are now 110 people strong. We're about £55 million in terms of turnover. We have just sold the business a month ago to a private equity business. I'm very happy about that. But I guess, with all of this, and I think about the experience that I've had, and I think about the journey and everything else, it is a life of extremes. It's amazing when it's good, and it's cut your wrist bad when it's bad. But your family and my family were the only ones that were with me when I was in such a difficult situation. And I couldn't have done it without them. And, if I was to give anyone advice here in the room about if you're going to start a company, if you've got children that want to start a company, is the same advice that my mother gave me, which is essentially, you should always, if you can, try and work for yourself. If you can, do it with a family member. And also, if there's ways in which you can do it with complementary skills, that's also quite important. There is a phrase that Sir Isaac Newton once said, was that if I have been able to see further than others, it is because I've stood on the shoulder of giants. And I guess in my instance, it was because I stood on the shoulders of my mother. Thank you.
Thank you, Sach, for those really inspiring words. So I think there were 2 things that I took away from that. Number 1, always listen to your mum. But actually, I thought her words were quite inspiring. So 1, work for yourself. 2, work for your family, because that brings trust. And 3, search for the next big thing. Very good. So can we give another round of applause to Sach? Now, please give a very warm welcome to Shainul Kassam, founder of Fortune Law. Shainul, over to you.
Good evening. When I was 5, I came to England from East Africa. I had long, shiny hair and pigtails and big brown eyes, and I did not speak a word of English. My parents brought me and my older sister here to keep us safe. Post-colonial Tanzania in the 1970s was in rapid decline. African socialism, ujamaa, eventually and ultimately failed. My parents, having brought us here, had to return to close down our businesses, leaving us with our extended family, whom I did not know. Thank you. They left when I was 5, and they returned when I was 7 and a half. They returned empty-handed. Nationalisation had seized our assets. I didn't have my mum and dad with me during those formative years. And being so small, I did not understand why. What that experience taught me, though, was that no matter how little you are and how big the world seems, you can survive. At 5 years old, I learned how to be strong. I am one of 3 daughters, the middle one, the naughty one, the one that always challenged the status quo. I am also my father's son. Despite coming from a conservative family, my father always told me that I did not have to get married, I had to get educated. I was always brought up to believe in myself. When my family lost all their material wealth, I learned from my father that your value is not in your wallet, it is in keeping your word. I learned the importance of education, self-belief, and integrity. Although I was always interested in business and my family have always been self-employed, I have loved the law since I was 14. I studied law at university, I went to law school, and I was able to secure a training contract with a London firm. I was elated. Now, all I had to do was work really hard and success would be mine. And I worked hard. I worked really hard. I worked 18 hours a day and I slept in the office. I worked 9 months without a day off and I floated 4 companies in a week. And I loved it. I loved it, and sometimes I hated it, but I loved it. That was the making of me, but that was also the breaking of me. Recognition did not come fast enough. When I asked for promotion to associate, they said no. They said I was too young, but I was running their department. By sheer accident, I found out that I was being paid less than my male colleagues for equal work. I challenged that direct discrimination internally and I won. But that and other gender discrimination battles that I had to fight wounded me. Merit should be enough, but very often it isn't. Not being validated hurts. I realized that talent, hard work, and loyalty weren't going to get me to where I needed to be anytime soon. I, who had been brought up by my family and my community to expect meritocracy, learned a big, hard lesson in inequality. I realized that the vision of the firm who had given me my first break and my vision were not aligned. So, age 29, 3.5 years qualified, and without a single client, I started Fortune Law. Within that first year, and initially from my kitchen table, we acted on not 1, but 2 stock market flotations, clearly showing that you don't need to be a partner in a big city law firm to work on complex, challenging, and rewarding work on your own terms. They wouldn't give me a seat at their table, so I built my own table. Women outnumber men on entering the legal profession, but only 28.8% of partners are female. And only 11% of partners, men and women combined, come from Black, Asian, and ethnic minority backgrounds. Today, a female Asian partner in a 26 to 80 partner law firm represents only 1.1% of the profession. Using these statistics at that time, I would have only had a 1% chance of becoming a partner in a law firm, and even then, I would have had to wait a decade and maybe 2 to become someone I had decided I was going to be when I was 14. The Law Society reported that I was the first female under 30 at that time to have started a law firm in this country. So now, when I tell my husband, sitting right there, that I'm 1 in a million, maybe he'll believe me. More young women are starting law firms and more women are attaining partnership, it is true. But change is taking too long. Yes, I have run a profitable business, got married and been blessed with 2 beautiful young boys. Yes, I haven't had to give up the law that I love. Yes, I am the sole breadwinner in my family and I thank my husband every day for that privilege, for supporting me so that I can be my whole self. But many young women believe that you can't have a successful career and have children, or you can't run your own business and be a good mum, and that is simply not true. You need drive, grit, and excellent time management skills. Excellent. But to fly, to soar, you need role models. If I had had positive female role models in the early part of my career, I might have made different choices. There weren't any for me, and I had to become my own role model. It took me a very long time, but eventually even I found a positive female role model. And I would like to leave you this evening with extracts of an email exchange between myself and Tina Williams when I sought her help on a significant development for my firm. Tina is a formidable lawyer in her field, the chair, a founder of, and the Williams of city law firm Fox Williams. This is what it sounds and feels like when women support each other. Dear Tina, about 10 years ago or so, I came to work for Fox Williams before I went off to set up my own practice. You were very kind to me and sent me off with your good wishes and a client to boot. I have a specific purpose in mind as I write this email, and it makes me wonder why I have not sought your counsel over the years. I asked her if I could take her to lunch or dinner, and we met the following week. We spoke for hours. I wish I hadn't waited a decade to ask for help. Don't wait. I thanked her. Actually, I sent her flowers. And I just want to say there is insufficient flower giving going on in the world, and this must improve. Anyway, Tina, on receiving them, said this: you should not have, because we all have a duty to support each other. When I was asked to speak this evening, I asked Tina if I could read that email out to you. And I ended with, if you are not comfortable with me saying everyone needs a Tina Williams, then do say so, and of course I won't. I hope you say yes. Young women need to know there are strong, successful, and encouraging women like you out there, and the wiser ones should be lifted to give more of themselves back. She replied, I am very honoured that you should wish to mention the very small amount of support I was able to give you. I am also shamed that you had no female role models. It has caused me to stop dead in my tracks and work out what more I can do to help the very talented women I have around me here. And there it is. That is how change happens. Before I even got up on this stage this evening, there are women in the city who will rise higher and shine brighter because we spent time in each other's company. That makes me smile. The World Economic Forum says that it will be 170 years before we will close the gender pay gap, globally, all things being equal. That is not going to happen in our lifetime, but it will happen. There are so many world problems out there that we should be fighting and overcoming together, men, women, and non-binary people. Gender inequality really should not be one of them. We can and we must close the gender pay gap. Even if we never see that day ourselves, it is not only our duty, but our great privilege to make that so. So be bold for change. Start today. Continue every day. Every day, your achievement and your hard work will not always speak for themselves. You must speak for yourself. Raise your voice, seek support, and be support. Find a role model, become a role model. Change the world. Start with your world. Demand your seat at the table. And remember that if they don't give you a seat at their table, you can, with these hands, you can build your own table. Thank you.
Thank you, Shainul. Wow, how do you follow on from that? I guess the thing that I took away was that age shouldn't be a barrier, merit should be enough. Very, very strong words. And that this movement about diversity is not just about gender, it's also about diversity. It's about BME communities, and it's about making change for yourself. So thank you, Shainul. Next, I'd like to welcome Naseem Jivraj. Naseem is an academic specializing in psychological anthropology. Thank you, Naseem.
Ordinary people living ordinary lives. Ordinary people living ordinary lives. We're ordinary people living ordinary
I hope what I share tonight resonates and ignites meaning for you. The clip you just heard is a song by the Bee Gees entitled Ordinary People Living Ordinary Lives, which I have often hummed without questioning. But given my life experiences, my studies, and my work, I think that that title is misguided. I think the title should say it is Extraordinary People Living Extraordinary Lives. Because as I see it, each one of us has our own unique emotional thoughts, emotional feelings, and emotional behaviors. And therefore, in turn, each life is extraordinary. And that most certainly for me, making change and shifts in several of my life challenges has come through understanding my emotions of fear, joy, stress, happiness, in all its shades. So let me try and explain what I mean. I am a mother to 4 children, a partner to my husband, and a member of my family. And these are by far the most important things to me. And yet, I knew things were just not working. For example, the home atmosphere always felt tense, as if my children were trying to behave perfectly, as if mom's love was conditional to good behavior. We never exchanged the difficult conversations, the puzzles of life, the challenges, the messiness. And if we did, it was mainly like a lecture where I talked and they listened. It was never a nurturing conversation. And with people generally, I never thought about speaking about challenging things. I always pretended things was just all right. Till a point came where I could feel that my children were moving away from someone who loved them more than life itself. And I knew change was needed. So what did I do? And what do I still do? I practice what I call the AAA strategy. And it goes somewhat like this. The first A is to acknowledge my emotional behaviors. So I acknowledge that I mostly refrained from I don't say much. My voice is never heard. I'm aloof. I'm possibly disconnected. I acknowledged that I rarely said no to people, and then I felt resentful and angry. And I acknowledged that my parenting style was extremely strict, high on discipline, and very low on trying to understand what my children were going through. And that leads me on to the second A, to accept my role in the situation. And this is by far the hardest thing I have to do, because I had to examine myself in each context. I had to accept that I never said much because I lacked academic knowledge. I had to accept that I never said no because I always wanted to feel loved. I had to accept that I was strict because I was fearful. Initially, all of this felt like an attack to me. It was an attack on my selfhood and my motherhood. Essentially everything I stood for, and my knee-jerk reaction was to say no, to get defensive, to argue back. But the third A is extremely helpful, because the third A asks me to assess, why is it so? What are my emotional needs? Without being judgmental and without allocating blame. And therefore I reflected inwards and I thought, well, possibly I have a certain personality. I veer towards being a perfectionist. I do overthink things. And yes, I do get anxious very easily. And coupled with that, as a very young person and a young adult, I've had my fair shares of happiness and extreme strife. So, for example, as a very young child, we lost our family home. I have faced several financial difficulties. I have often perceived myself as ugly. I have thought that I was an academic failure. Essentially, several social, emotional, and spiritual ups and downs. And therefore, I then had to think, well, what are my emotional needs? And I realized that to feel confident, I had to feel academically sound. To feel secure, I needed to know that I was loved. To feel peaceful, I needed to know that my children were growing up as grounded and responsible members of society. So, my AAA strategy was really helpful because it unpicked a lot of things for me, and it allowed me to take action for change in a slightly knowing manner. So, what did I do? First example, the AAA strategy helped me realize I had to educate myself. I realized my need to be academically sound, to feel confident to voice my thoughts, was my own deep-rooted problem. So at the age of 42, I went back to academia, and I must say I am thriving on it. Another example. The strategy pushed me to face my own demons and to critically examine my need to know I am loved, to feel secure. And I reflected, thinking through developmental and cross-cultural psychology, that in fact, when a baby is born, the first thing it requires is love and care, even before food. And an adult will naturally give that baby love and care. So that means that I have been given love and care. But as we grow up and things change, the language of love that people have changes. It depends on your personality, your tradition, your culture, your upbringing. So for example, some of my children will write me essays in a birthday card. Some might just forget to give me one. Some will lend me a listening ear. Others will be blunt. Some will take me shopping and help me with my makeup. And others will critically read my work and criticize it and help me think through what I have written. Some will help me cook, and others will just eat anything I've put on the table because they're just so hungry. Essentially, everybody has a different language of love, and what I need to do is understand and be cognizant of that. However, at its crux, from a humanistic perspective and my own spiritual perspective, the point is rather more deeper. I see people as social animals who require honesty and compassion as the bedrock of existence. And from my own spiritual perspective, I think that I am spiritually connected to everyone. It then follows that my focus on not being loved needs to be reconsidered. I should focus on how I can love others and myself with honesty and with compassion, so that my environment radiates with love and compassion as I want. And if I constantly focus on love from others, then the ethical premise on which I am operating is slightly mistaken. Importantly also, I am giving away the remote control of my feelings to someone else, instead of trusting myself and the universe to who I feel that I am connected. Therefore, now I ask, how can I love others and myself? Practicing this does make me feel calmer and feel more grounded. And finally, my last example, that is about my parenting style. The strategy helped me trust in my children to do and be what is right for them. I realized that my strictness came from my migration experience, coming from a culture and from a family background which was quite traditional, and that was extremely embodied in me. It was in my body. I then came to a very different context in the West, and that made me extremely fearful. So let me explain what that means. In schools today, religious education includes arguments from psychologists, anthropologists, philosophers, historians, theologians, and you are experiencing various different arguments within that context. So one of my children came up to me after reading the book, The God Delusion by Richard Dawkins, to argue with me about the existence of God. I got angry. I shouted. That was not a pleasant experience. But two good things came out of that. The first, the thesis I wrote for my master's was on that topic. And second, I became more cognizant to the idea that, in fact, my children are facing all kinds of narratives in society in which they live and in which they travel. And essentially, the home needs to be a secure place to have any kind of conversation. So now, when one of my other children came and said, "Mom, I think I'm an atheist," I was able to smile. I said, "Wow, gosh, that's interesting. Come, let's talk about it." I am able to trust my children to be who they need to be and to be a guide with them and walk their path with them. So in conclusion, I hope that I have been able to illustrate to you, through an example of my own emotional self, how people are extraordinary, living extraordinary lives. I am trying to make shifts using the AAA, but I don't have a magic wand. I wish I did. Essentially, I take one step forward and 2 steps back, but 1 step forward again. I believe that managing my emotions is my own responsibility, and I'm trying to acknowledge, accept, and assess my emotional self so that I am able to work with honesty, not only for myself, but for my family, for my work as a therapist with people in gender violence, in human trafficking, in abuse, and in all the academic endeavors that I have within the refugee context. I believe I'm always a work in progress, and I am a lifelong quest. Thank you.
Thank you, Naseem. Self-betterment, a very interesting topic and one we can all learn from. It was really inspirational. Thank you. Can we all give a round of applause for Naseem? I would just like to add that Naseem currently works with women, enabling them to deal with issues around depression. The women's portfolio are at the start of a journey with Naseem to forge a team driving this agenda for our women. As part of this work, we will be designing and delivering workshops to address this issue going forward. We'd like to thank Naseem deeply for offering her services in helping us to put tools to help others within this often very misunderstood area. Thank you. So last but very not least, our final speaker for this evening, Geeta Sidhu-Robb, CEO and founder of Nosh Detox. Please give a warm welcome to Geeta.
I'd like to point out it's very unfair to be the last speaker before we go anywhere, because that was really, yeah, don't give me that. I shouldn't have come when I saw my name last. Thank you all so much for sitting through these really incredibly inspiring talks. I've gotten more and more nervous as I sat there because I'm really not sure how you follow. It's really been lovely, thank you. It's been really, really inspiring. And thank you very much for the honor and the privilege of being able to speak here. You know, I was laughing because we're all Africans in one way or another, really, because I'm from Malawi. My mother's Kenyan. And I had a very traditional upbringing. I don't really look it, but I did. And my mother really wanted you for her child because, you know, it was doctor, lawyer, accountant, death or marriage. And I chose law, right? Because there's no blood and there's no numbers. I did try the marriage part. I wasn't so great at that. So, you know, that whole I want to be a lawyer thing, wow. My mother would have been thrilled. I was like, shoot me now. I hated every minute of it. I really did. But I did it because those were my choices. And, you know, I wanted to talk tonight about the power of choice. My upbringing didn't leave me with a lot of choice. I'm an Indian girl of my upbringing, my monetary background, my religion, my everything. And what I was told was, you will do this, you will eat like this, you will be this, you will do this. And I was such a rebel. I mean, oh my God, shoot me now. I was like, really? Oh, okay. And I'd pick my little fights to try and get round. Until I came to this country and I was 15 years old. And I was suddenly alone. And we came for school, right? That's what you did. You came to get a better life, and we're immigrants and blah, blah, blah. And I was just like, God, why am I here? Why am I being punished? Because I'm completely alone and I didn't understand the culture. I wasn't prepared in any way whatsoever to be here. I wasn't prepared in any capacity. And I come from a really comfortable, wealthy, you know, well brought up type of background. You know, you kind of do this stuff and then this comes out. I'm the output child here. And I had my first child, and it was very interesting because I made my first choice that affected my life. I went in to see the doctor, and they said, you know, you should vaccinate him. And there was this young woman, and I said, are you sure? Because I've read about these vaccinations, because law left me with the ability to read and research, not much else. And I said, you know, are you sure? And she said, you know, if that was my child, I would vaccinate him. And I went, okay, because I did what I was told. That was kind of my inherent, you know, what did you say? Body. It was my, you know, it was a part of me. And so I did. And my son was allergic to his vaccinations, although it was apparently a figment of my imagination. And he became progressively ill. And we spent the next 200 days in hospital out of the next 365. We spent so much time in emergency that the lady was a bridesmaid at my next wedding. I was like, you know, we know each other so well, you may as well come. My mother wasn't coming to any more of my marriages anyway, so we were all good. I was like, we need a buy-in family, you can come with me. And my mother's not here tonight, so we're all good. Oh, we're filming it, oops. So I turned up, and I was kind of doing my thing, and then I got married again, having learnt nothing. And I had 2 more children, which was lovely. I really liked the children part of it. And I carried on working. I carried not making them, having them. I carried on with the law. I carried on being a lawyer for a little while longer until my last child was born. And I ended up in a really, really, really an appalling marriage. And I wanted to get out of my marriage, and I wasn't brought up to leave marriages again, because I was just like, nobody cared if it was good marriage or bad marriage. Just like, it's your second marriage. What is wrong with you? Stay there. Just die quietly. I was like, no, I don't want to. I don't really, it's not working for me. So I picked up my 3 children under the age of 7. This is all true. I picked up my 3 children under the age of 7, and we left. And we left with like, we entered Christmas with £150 in my pocket, because my ex-husband didn't take well to us leaving this deeply, deeply wealthy, wonderful life we were living. It didn't look good. And nobody really liked me leaving my marriage. And that was my next decision that I made. And I mean, I'd love to say it was the power of choice and I was being emancipated. I wasn't doing any of those things. There was no intelligence beyond, I was moving away from pain. That was what I was doing. And so I changed my life in ways that I look now and I think, if I had known what I was going to do, would I have ever done it? I'd like to think I'd still have done it, but I couldn't swear to it. I'd probably have left with a bag of money. And I ended up, sleeping on my girlfriend's floor. She had 1 room, which she lent me, bless her forever. And I slept on her floor for 7.5 months in cushions on the floor. And she and the children slept on the bed. And the baby was little, so we were doing really well, right? My mother left town. And she locked up her flat in Chelsea, and she left town. And I didn't really know what to do, and I didn't know who to go to, and there was me and there was these kids, and I made a choice. And my choices were, you know, either shut up and go back. And I have to tell you, these were literally choices that were pointed out to me. Or, you know, shut up and take the council flat that you've been offered, wherever it was. I'd never heard of it. I wasn't going there. I lived in Chelsea. And, or just shut up, all right? You know, like just, and I was like, you know what? I don't like any of those choices. I want another version of that. And I made certain decisions in that day that have stood me in very good stead. One was that it was actually, I wanted my children to have the life I think they deserved. I wanted to provide that life for them, and that it was my right to make my choices and my decisions the way I wanted to make them. That all sounds really great, right? Except that we had to eat. And then I was like, how do you do that? And I stopped being a lawyer because my ex had bankrupted me on my way out the door, and there wasn't much call for bankrupt corporate lawyers in those days either. So that, you know, it all kind of fell apart really quite well. It was thorough, very thorough. And so I set myself up as a consultant. I didn't really know what they were, but I did. And I put a huge paycheck at the end of it. And I went, every time somebody came and said, can you do this? I was like, yes, absolutely. I didn't not know how to do any of it. But I was like, you know, what's worse? And it kind of took us down the next sort of 6-8 years of our journey. And then I found a job where they would take out the lease on my house because I couldn't get a lease because I was a bankrupt. And so they took out the lease on my house. And so I took the job. I was like, yeah, that's a given. And I put my kids through school, and they would get chucked out of school because we didn't have school fees. And then they would get taken back the next day when Mummy had found a way to remind the school that we were coming because I'd forgotten to what do you tell your kids? And I sold all my jewelry. I'd never looked up pawn shop before, and I spelt it wrong. Seriously, I was like, oh my God, really? Don't do that. Really, really. And I mean, if there was a way I could screw up, I absolutely did. And then one day, I thought, you know, one of my girlfriends came to me and said, look, I'm so bored with listening to how poor you are. Why don't you take children out of private school? I'm like, I'm Indian. They shoot you if you do that. You can't do that. They've got to stay there. And so she's like, all right, enough about you. Talk about me. I'm fat. I need to lose weight. I was like, oh my God. You know, by now I knew, I had worked with my son's eczema and asthma, and I'd cured his eczema, cured his asthma. I knew how to do anything with anybody's body to heal them. And I said, don't be ridiculous. Just do this and you lose weight. And she did. And she rang me up 6 weeks later and went, people will pay you money for this. Go do this. I was like, oh. And I set up Nosh 3 days later. Literally set up Nosh 3 days later. And that's how I started this company today. And it's been lovely building the business. It's been lovely having the choice to do what I want to do every day, except when I have to like come up with money to do different things. That's not so lovely. And I really miss wages. I'm like, you know, why don't people pay me wages and a salary and stuff like that? But, you know, I love what I do because it's given me the ability to make different choices to the ones that I thought I had and the ones I was brought up with. And my children, bless them, got scholarships very, very young. And they used to come to me and say, Mama, I pay for my own school fees. And I'm like, you really do. You know, you do. And so I have a very close relationship with my children that I would not have had the privilege of having, I think, had this wonderful, what I now see as a gift, had come into my life. I have the privilege of working with a huge number of women that don't know what to do, don't know who supports them, don't have any unconditional loving support, and that's what I give them. And I help them to feel strong, I help them to believe in themselves, I empower them, and I just look back, and that's a horrible story, but is it? It was such a gift. Every step of every place of every day is such a gift. And my only abiding goal through all of that was that my children were never going to suffer for my choices. That was that was what I wanted. I wanted to come out of it thinking, you know, it's okay. You know, you're kind of the hero mother. It's like whatever. I don't buy this, I don't buy that, meh. But I wanted them to never suffer. And when I was leaving tonight to come here, my youngest daughter said to me, she said, Mama, you know we're not spoiled, right? I'm like, no, baby, I know you're not spoiled. She goes, good. Can we please go to the Maldives now? I was like, you know, well, I think we probably succeeded in getting them a little too confident, actually. But I don't know if I can leave you with any interesting stories, other than I think that the ability to screw up and to still continue and to find the joy and the gift in whatever you do is a finely honed skill. And I have a PhD in it.
Thank you so much, Rena. Thank you. I took away two things with that, and I'm not sure if you all found them. There was lots of stuff in there, but I found two pieces that I think will stay with me. Number one, that you provide the life for your children that you think that they deserve. And number two, that you have a right to choose. Very, very profound points. So can we all give a round of applause to Rena? Geeta. Sorry, my mistake, Geeta. Sorry. Okay, so we have just a few minutes, a couple of minutes to take some questions now that we've heard from all our wonderful speakers. So we have some roving mics going around the room. If you have any questions, can I ask that you stand up, say your name, and explain who it is that you'd like to answer the question? I think we have one over here.
My question is, and it's kind of profound to the whole panel, thank you for sharing all that information and such personal stories. I mean, you're so brave, all of you, and rather glamorous, I have to say, jealous of shoes. So my question is, if, because I know it's about women empowerment, I really believe in that, I'm writing something and people know me here, if you were of the opposite sex, whether you're gay, straight, bi, tie, it doesn't matter, if you could actually have one thing that you could do, and that's the whole panel, to empower the opposite sex, what would that be? Yeah, you're all on Nanny's naughty step now, aren't you? So that's my question, if I may pass that back.
Where's the mic? Who'd like to take that?
Thank you, Oscar. So I mentioned in my talk that I'm the sole breadwinner in my family at the moment, and the reason why that is, my husband is a teacher, and we, for the first time in our lives, we didn't need childcare so much, and I had an appointment within the community that requires me to travel. And so we thought about this and we thought, what could we do that was best for our children? And together we decided that what was best for our children is that for Kaya to become the primary carer. And so that's empowered me and that's empowered him. And I found it really difficult to start off with because, you know, he doesn't do things at home quite the way I'd like them to be done. But, you know, that's been our journey together, and it's worked really, really well for us. And, you know, I thought I had a really modern outlook, but I found it really difficult, actually, if I'm honest, to have this role reversal. And it wasn't just us, it was what people thought outside of us. But we're doing what we think is best for our family, for our two young boys together. And I think that in doing that and making those choices together, we've empowered both of us.
I think I'll pick up from what you've said. You've really thrown me because no, but I think if I pick up from there, I'd say no matter who you are or what gender or what sexuality, I suppose what I'd ask for is for people to eliminate all judgment. You know, people are incredibly judgmental of other people. And I think that empowers us if we can look at people and not judge them for the way that we I suppose, bring our own point of view or perspective or worldview and put that out onto other people. So I was recently traveling to the United States to cover the Muslim ban. And, you know, it was quite extraordinary because my place of birth on my passport says Kabul. It wasn't one of the countries on the ban list, but a lot of people from Afghanistan who were traveling in were being questioned. But as soon as I arrived at customs, they asked me if I was there for Fashion Week and let me through immediately. I wasn't bothered, but what I mean to say is perhaps I didn't fit the portfolio of what you know, the judgment call that they were making. So yeah, for me that would be empowering yourself, if no matter what gender you are.
I have about 80% of my employees are women, and when I train them or when I employ, you know, if there's a job vacancy, we don't have specifications, of course. We don't have, you know, a bias towards who comes in for the interview, but naturally, you know, it tends to be female focused because it's a fashion business. Now, when we train them or when we're trying to influence them, particularly from a personal perspective, I don't do anything different as I would to a guy as I am to a girl. And I'll give you a prime example of this, is that, you know, a lot of the girls that work in my buying team are negotiating with, you know, very hard-faced, you know, men who think that they know it all. And what I did instead is I trained them in neuro-linguistic programming, which is to understand their body language and their eye movement and to help them secure deals, you know, without having to talk too much, right? There's lots of ways in which you can manipulate someone without having to, you know, through me, right, without saying too much and without, you know, doing too much. And I think, you know, from my point of view, I mean, it's a fantastic question because, you know, it's very easy to say that you would treat one gender different to the other, but from my point of view and the way in which I look at it personally is that it's the same. You know, we give equal opportunity within the business, and it's up to those individuals to then take that learning and to apply it in their own circumstance. But good question.
I'm in the health business, so for me it means that the biggest problem that I see now is in the way that men's health particularly change. Women are much more attuned to health because we care more so about how we look, and that becomes a route towards our health. With men, the problem I see coming in my clients is between the ages of about 45 to 55, there's such a rapid deterioration in health. And I think that's a very, very big problem. And if there was something that I could say would be that when men's health starts to change, if they could find another kind of power at that age and then become healthy from there, that would be life-changing, I think. It's really, really one of the biggest problems that I see in my business.
I guess I will have to speak from an emotional intelligence perspective, and I'll speak in two bits. The first bit is from my work, and so what I experience is I predominantly work with women, and they come to me with a lot of abuse. And the question that really goes through my head is that what is going through for the men? You know, we always worry about the women in feminism, but I'm actually interested in what happens to those poor boys when they watch their father abusing their mother. I'm interested to know what goes through their emotions and their body, and then what is happening to them when they grow up, because none of that has been processed. So that's my first bit. That really worries me, and I want to study that. In terms of my life and what I see in the West, I do know that a lot of African Ismailis came here at a very young age, and that includes boys, and they all went to boarding school. And I wonder what happened to their emotional world, because the English are very strict about emotions. But boys have emotions just like girls do. And actually, emotions is not gendered. Emotions is emotions. And so you really need to work on it.
Unfortunately, it was a wonderful question, but we have run out of time. And in order to let you get home at a reasonable hour this evening, I'm afraid we're going to have to pull that to a close. But if you do have any questions, any thoughts after this event, please do contact the WAP or Women Empowered email addresses, which are at the back of your programs, or leave feedback, or leave your questions on the feedback sheets and we'll get in touch with you. So we've heard a lot today about choices, about giving voices, and about championing women. I'd like to thank you all for being a wonderful audience this evening. And before we close, I'd like to hand over to Rena Ranger, founder of Women Empowered, our partner organisation this evening. Thank you, everybody.
Ladies and gentlemen, on behalf of myself and the WE team that is here today, Kajal, Patel and Devorah, I just wanted to say a few brief words. Women Empowered, or we as we feel we are and like to call ourselves, we're a social initiative, and we hold similar events like this tonight a couple of times a year, where we bring inspiring speakers and real stories to anyone who wishes to hear them. We have a charitable arm which mainly focuses more on the giving of time. For example, we collaborate with another organisation once a month and take part in a homeless food distribution for the homeless and needy. We also have a monthly blog, and it is where members of the WE community write on a particular topic for the benefit of the WE community. Our latest blog, The True Meaning of Motherhood, features some beautifully touching words by an incredible person who is familiar to us all and sitting right here. And I really would urge you to visit our website. Our blog is called Grit, and if you locate it, I would really ask you to read it for yourselves, because it is an incredibly touching and very honest piece. Please also do run your eye through the list of topics and write for us so that we can also benefit from your wisdoms, your thoughts, and your advice. If you want to get involved with Women Empowered, it's really, really very simple. You either have to like our Facebook page or join our subscription list. We're very uncomplicated people. We are open to all, including men. We is a collaborative effort, as you have just heard, and we are very proud to have collaborated with you all. We and WAP have found our commonality, and with that, we have combined our strengths. We've shared our resources, we've learnt from each other. We've reached out to more people than perhaps we may have been able to individually. There really is such strength in collaboration, and our mutual synergies have resulted, if I may say so, in a jam-packed evening of honesty, inspiration, motivation, encouragement, new friendships and alliances. A wise person once said that individually we are one drop, together we are an ocean. The world at this very moment in time is an incredibly unexpected place. But together, working with each other and not against each other, we can achieve so much on so many levels, and you never know, we may also be able to turn the tide. I want to thank all our speakers, and thank you all too. I want to thank the remarkable Yalda Hakim, the perennially entrepreneurial Sach, the resilient and determined Shainul, the candid and wise Naseem, and the humorous and hard-hitting Geeta. Sach, Yalda and Geeta, and so many of you here tonight, whose continual support of we allows us to be. So thank you all, and thank you to the Women's Activities Portfolio for the opportunity, the honour and the privilege of collaborating together. And thank you all for your warmth and hospitality. We hope that this is one of the first of many collaborative events together. Thank you.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Ladies and gentlemen, leaders, our esteemed collaborators, Women Empowered, my dear brothers and sisters, I'm speechless. What an amazing evening. This would not have been possible, however, without the dedication, support, and help of many. As with all collaborative efforts, a multitude of thanks is due, so please bear with me whilst I do this justice. At this juncture, may I ask President Banu Nazira Hashim and Vice President Banu Dr. Shazma Mawani to join me in presenting small tokens of our appreciation to our speakers. Please, if you could come up. Thank you. Firstly, to our keynote speaker, Yalda Hakim. Your time is precious and you are extremely busy. Your time is precious and you are extremely busy, but you have taken that time out of your busy schedule to support today's event, and for that we are truly grateful. I speak on behalf of us all when I say that your address was captivating and inspiring. Your open honesty has given us all much to think about. To all our TED Talk speakers, huge thanks. For without you, there would be no event. You have each one been instrumental in leading today's celebration of International Women's Day. Everyone in this room will surely echo my vote of admiration for sharing your personal stories so honestly and candidly. There is no doubt that you will have ignited compelling and thought-provoking discussion long after the room is emptied. May I please ask each one of you to come up turn when I call your name. Naseem Jivraj. Geeta, Sidhu-Robb. Shainul Kassam. And last but not least, Sach Kukadia, our gentleman on the panel. Last but not least, Salim Alaoji, a warm vote of thanks to you for keeping the evening so much on track and effectively with so much grace. I hope you've all enjoyed meeting our collaborators, Women Empowered. Please join me in offering them and their team a big thank you. We, like they, are honoured to have worked together, and by doing so acknowledging that in the end, regardless of faith, position, or background, we are all one human race, and we are all women and men who live through similar challenges and aspire to be bold for change. To our Ismaili Women's Activities Portfolio team and extended team of volunteers, you are all amazing women. And no, lest we forget or get frowned upon, we haven't forgotten our brave male who's also in the room. He's obviously very brave because he has to work with some very empowered women. Together, you have all delivered another exceptional event. Our whole team worked tirelessly, have had to balance work, family, and their commitments to our women's agenda. Your dedication to make this happen, wherever you are, I can't see you all, is deeply appreciated, and you should all be proud of yourselves this evening. To Shayla Lalani, without whom we would have all struggled to keep the ship firmly on track, and who has helped lead this project team from start to finish, thank you and bless you, wherever you are. Finally, I humbly and gracefully offer our deepest gratitude to our amazing Ismaili volunteers. A tremendous amount of organisation and hard work is needed to put these events together at the Ismaili Centre. We could not achieve this without your dedication, commitment and professionalism, and our volunteers, and you never cease to amaze us. If I have missed anyone, and to all other volunteers who have helped us in the lead up to this evening, we are grateful for your unconditional service. This inspirational quote from Princess Zahra Aga Khan, made in 1997, is the foundation for my personal desire to make a difference and the motto of our Women's Activities Portfolio Committee. Quote, "We must address all the problems that face women, no matter how delicate or controversial these may be. We must develop credibility and self-assurance, and we must learn from others. Most of all, we must attempt to build cooperation among continents, between genders, and among socio-economic strata at every level and every stage of women's economic empowerment. By continuing to work together jointly and widely, we will achieve much more, because let's all be clear, there is still much to do in order to make parity a reality and push towards propelling women around the world to a place of respect, safety, dignity, and empowerment.